I'm from Austin, Texas, and moving from there to Memphis for school was kind of a different shift. And the differences that stood out to me were the drivers, for one. In Texas, I could drive, and some people would let me pass and get in front of them so I could make a light. In Memphis, it was more of a, for lack of a better word, cutthroat. If you don't make it, you don't make it. It was my turn to go, and snooze, you lose. Another thing that was different was the amount of people. In Texas, there's a lot of people, but it's a large state, and so everyone's just kind of scattered around. But in Memphis, there's a lot of people in a very small place. And my information's a few years old from being in Austin, but from what I gathered, half of California has already moved there. But the most alarming and really the greatest culture shock to me was the barbecue. I don't know who taught the people in Tennessee how to make barbecue, but in Texas we use the cow. And that seems to be a completely foreign concept to everyone in Tennessee who use pig, and I've noticed that is often the case here. And so that was unfamiliar to me. Everything about Memphis was unfamiliar. It was different. It was strange. It kind of made me a little uncomfortable at times. What was really the most unfamiliar and the most uncomfortable thing, however, happened in 2012. My dad's father was diagnosed with stage 4 mesothelioma, and that's a cancer of the lungs. And he was given 6 months to live. He lasted maybe a month and a half, maybe 2. And up until that point, I knew what death was. Brother and so at Southwest, my home congregation, passed away. Okay, I won't get to see him at church anymore, but it never affected me in any real way until my grandfather died. He was the first one of my grandparents to die. And it was a very uncomfortable, bitter feeling. I was completely out of my element. I didn't know what to do. It was as if my entire world had been turned upside down. And maybe that's happened to you, where the death of a loved one, a family member, has turned your world upside down. I'm here to tell you tonight that the world has already been turned upside down. Or rather, it was. Tonight, as we study tonight, there's 3 points I want you to keep in the forefront of your mind, the 3 main points of this lesson. What was turned upside down? Who turned that upside down? And who turned it right side up? In Genesis 1, God created the heavens and the earth. And through his creation, everything that had a particular job. The grass was to grow and be green, to provide oxygen. Human beings were here to take care of the garden that they were put into. The animals were to grow and to mature, to multiply. And God called it good. Everything was good, and God had set a natural order of things to occur. But something happened. A couple chapters later, in Genesis chapter 3, the serpent came. And Eve was very upfront with him at first. God said that you shall not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because then you shall die. That is what God said. And the first lie, the first half-truth told in the Bible is here. When the serpent says, you shall not surely die. All he did was add one word, and that changed everything. And Eve looked upon the apple, or whatever fruit it was, and saw that it was good for the eyes, looked like it tasted well, and it would make her wise. And so she ate, and she gave it to her husband, and he also ate. The simple law that God had set up, saying, you shall not eat of this tree, the only law he had for them, was broken. And in this process, the world had been shifted upside down. The order of things had been shifted. Man suffered the consequences, as did woman, but mankind as a whole. They were exiled from the garden. Man would know death. Sure, the serpent told part of the truth, and he said, "You shall not surely die." And Adam and Eve ate, and they didn't drop dead, as Ananias and Sapphira did in Acts. They didn't drop dead immediately. But when they were exiled, they were cut off from the tree of life, something that would give them eternity on this earth. And they died. During this time, man would have sickness, and he would have to work to eat, toil the fields that were cursed. I guess that would imply weeds. I'm not sure. I'm not a farmer like some of you. But in this, the serpent also was punished. God said to him, ye and your offspring shall slither among the earth. That will be your punishment. And they were separated from God. Away from God, there is only suffering, a broken fellowship, and a disunity with him. Sin can be translated as simply as a separation from God. And a separation from the life giver equals death. And this pattern of man sitting and dying has followed us through the ages. Romans 5 and verse 12. Now, the one who turned this upside down, many would say it was Adam and Eve, because they listened to the serpent and they ate of it, and they separated themselves from God. And they turned the world upside down. But I'd venture to say that it was the serpent, first and foremost, as the one who lied to them and led them down that path of destruction. And so the question is simply, who is he? The devil, or commonly referred to as Satan. Satan, translated, means the adversary, the enemy. Enemy against whom? Well, first of all, how about mankind? As proven in Genesis chapter 3, when he lied to Eve and caused her to sin. But a more evidence example is Job. When God called together all of his sons together, Satan also came with them. And he put God in such a situation where God couldn't deny him to tempt Job, to curse God. God was pitted against Satan, and as was his servant Job. And God was like, okay, one condition. Do whatever you like to him, but you cannot touch him. Not a hair on his head. All right, I can do that. Simple. First bad news of the day. Job hears that a house where his children were feasting together had collapsed and killed all of them. That's hard enough. Not one, not two, 10 died. And at the same time he's hearing this information, more servants come and tell him that his sheep have been killed and stolen, along with his cattle and his camels. All of his worldly possessions have been taken from him. A man of great wealth, brought very low. So much so that his wife told him to curse God and die. Curse God to tell him, why is this happening to me? And to die so that nothing more would happen. And when the adversary, the enemy, saw that he didn't break Job at that point, he came back to God and talked some more with him. And God said, I'll let you touch him this time, but you cannot kill him. I can do that. I can bring him even lower. And when Satan touched Job, sickness came upon him, boils, diseases known then and now, leprosy, even. I told you a little earlier about my grandfather who died from cancer. Mesothelioma is a cancer that fills the lungs up with a fluid, and every 12 hours or so he would have to have that fluid drained. It was painful to breathe, to speak, and from the chemo radiation that he was doing, he didn't want to eat, not like he could anyway with the cancer. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't even formulate words at the end because it was so painful to speak. Now, take that concept and crank it up to 11. My grandfather got it easy compared to Job. He was sick, he was ill, and he died. Job, on the other hand, suffered through all of this, and he couldn't die. But not once did he blame God. A righteous man from Uz withstood the adversary, withstood the enemy, not to his face necessarily, but through everything that he faced. What about the angelic bodies? The agents of heaven. In Jude 9, Jude says that Michael contended with Satan over the body of Moses. Thoughts on Satan are many, being a demigod, an angel, even an archangel. If we were to proceed with this thought of him as an angel who led his brothers against God in a heavenly revolt where they were cast down from heaven, he didn't do his brothers and sisters any favors, did he? I know I certainly wouldn't want to lead my brother against an omnipotent being who was able to create the universe just from speaking. Not only was he against the archangel Michael, who is a direct agent of God, and also him being against the righteous people of earth, us, Job, the unrighteous ones too. But being indirect as much as he is direct, he is also an adversary against God. Not only did he wreck God's creation at the beginning, but he pit himself in a legal debate with God in Job. And then when God the Word came down to earth, John 1:1 and following, he tempted him as well. Tempting God. I wouldn't want to do that. He tempted him in Matthew 4:4 with how he tempted everyone else up until then, and still does. Lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Satan is an adversary, not just against humanity or against the angelic bodies above, but also God and the creation that he made and he called good. For what purpose? Isn't it interesting how thousands of years later, people that we deem as evil, corrupt, we call them serpents too. People who seem to be of the devil. That man's a snake. His words are poison. David claimed that his adversaries and the enemies of God had fangs, sharp like a serpent's, and the tongue very similar to that. Psalm 140 and verse 3. Beware of the adversary. The man who turned the world upside down for his enjoyment. I can't describe to you what he looks like. Some people say that he's a imp on your shoulder. one who whispers things in your ears and says, hey, do this. It won't hurt. It won't bite. Against the angel on the other side who's, don't do that. Do this. There's a better way. Almost cartoonish. I don't know if he does look like how we've portrayed him in modern culture as a man in a red suit with a forked tail and a pitchfork, ready to get you if you mess up. All I know is that he has pitted himself against us, against God, and he has done a very successful job of doing so. Flipping it upside down and leaving it for someone to flip everything back up. It took God, the Word, the creator of everything, to come down. And he knew this was coming. There was no contingency plan. There was nothing to say, we messed up. Got to do something about it. No, he had a plan in effect, one that he knew about. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9 says that he was ready for this. He had it planned when? Before time. Before time began, God was ready for this. And we know that this is true because in Titus chapter 1 and verse 2, it says that God doesn't lie. When God came down, he brought something with him. The offer of salvation. Not only to save us in the second life, but to flip our world right side up, which he did in John 18. Isn't it interesting that the Creator, the life giver, had to come down and die to give us life after this, especially when he did not have to. And when he came down and when he died, he purchased something with his blood. At the time of that death, he ushered in a new order of things. He ushered in an order of godliness. He sanctioned a new covenant, a new priesthood. And when he died, his blood purchased a group of people. The ecclesia, the called out of the world to serve God and his light. He purchased that church with his blood, Acts 20 and verse 28. And while Jesus righted this world with his death, and when he was resurrected, he was here for a little while longer, then he ascended. Why? To minister unto God in heaven. Hebrews 8 and verse 2. But he left us, the church. I don't know about you, but I quite enjoy roller coasters. I enjoy sometimes spinning around and getting dizzy. But when it's a matter of something like this, and you can't grab onto something, you can't stand straight, and you can't think clearly. You're disoriented. And that's what happens, right? You're flipped up, you're flipped upside down, then you flip right back up, right? In Acts 17 and verse 6, the Pharisees brought Jason to Gallio. They said, here is the man, here is part of the group of people that have come and turned our world upside down. They didn't know what was happening. Rather, they did, but they didn't choose to accept it. But there were some that didn't know what was happening, and their entire world had been flipped upside down or righted in this case. The church isn't here to cause confusion. The church is here to reorient humanity to God, to make it to where they can stand straight, certain of their footing with God. We're here to right the minds and have everyone set and ready. Because if they're not standing when he comes again, they'll fall. This evening, if you are still in a state of disorientation from having the world righted, still dizzy, and you want to study and be righted, to be oriented to the coming world, to the new order that is here, then we would welcome you. If you have already been reoriented, but you've had a dizzy spell, and you're not sure what you can grab onto, also I would invite you to come forward right now as we stand and as we sing.